Hey, in this episode of Beyond at Home, we're starting a brand new conversation. It's going to last for 4 episodes, and we're going to talk about how to get what you really want. And by the end of this series, hopefully, you'll know how to get what you really want. Now, with a few episodes around this idea of how to get what you really want, the question that begs to be asked at the start is, what do you want? As you head into 2021 or the year ahead, what is it that you want? Is it happiness? Is it maybe a promotion at work? Is it the fact that maybe there's a special someone or a relationship that you really, really want? Now, on the surface, that question, what do you want, seems like a simple question to ask, but the reality is, if you pause for a while, if you pause for long enough, you discover that question is really, really tricky. Here's what I mean by that. When I ask that question, what do you want? Chances are none of you thought about, but all of us want this. We all want our own way. When it comes to life and my life, you want your way and I want my way. But here's the problem with this is that oftentimes when we get our own way, we actually get in our way. And you know this because maybe there was a moment where you won the argument or your big personality pushed through things or you got it done, but in the process you fractured relationships. And you got your own way, but you also got in your way. Here's another thing that makes that question a little bit tricky is because we always want to do what we want to do. But the problem with that is if you always do what you want to do, you end up limiting your future options. The most extreme example I can think about this is people in jail, right? Because people in jail, they did what they always wanted to do. And what happened as a result? Well, some of their future options got taken away from them. Another reason that this question is tricky is because we want perpetual pleasure. Now, I wish I could have thought of something better than pleasure for that word, because I know when everyone thinks of pleasure, you think of binge watching YouTube videos, right? No, we think of sex, right? But here's the thing is pleasure is much more than sex. Pleasure could be that hobby or food or alcohol or that habit that you have that no one else knows about. And it's this thing that starts off as something that we love and something that we enjoy, but it becomes addictive. And over time, this thing that is addictive begins to control us. And so you got what you wanted in the moment, but you wish you'd never gotten it because now you struggle to control it. Another reason that this question is tricky is because if you're someone who's like, well, I don't know what I want, Chris. The challenge for all of us is that once we do know what we want it now. Like we live in a world, and it's great because we can get things whenever we want them. We can get things at a push of a button. We can get things with same-day shipping or same-day dispatch. But here's the challenge with that, is what we want now isn't always what we want later. And you know this because there are some things that you wanted or that you just had to have in the moment. Like you had to have him, you had to have her, you had to have that job, you had to buy that car. But the problem is later lasts longer. And now you're living in the later. And you just think to yourself, I wish I hadn't bought that. I don't know why I took that opportunity. I don't know why I dated him or dated her. And the reality is later lasts longer, but now screams so much louder. In fact, if you think about this question long enough, what you'll discover is that this want is a tricky thing. But here's some good news, is James, the brother of Jesus, helps us navigate this tricky thing that we call want. Now, I don't want to skip past that detail too quickly. James, the brother of Jesus. Could you imagine what would happen today if someone came out, an archaeologist, and said, hey, we have a document that we have verified that was written by the brother of Jesus? Chances are, even if you weren't a Jesus follower, you'd at least go online and read what the brother of Jesus had to say. Well, the good news is we already have that document, and it's collected in the documents that Jesus followers called the New Testament. And in this document that James writes, he actually helps us address this tricky question of what do you want? And he does so by asking a different question. And he asks it this way. He says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? In other words, James wants to know, he goes, what's the source of all the fights and arguments that are a part of your life. He says this, he says, don't they come from your desires that battle within you? What he's saying is that within inside you and within inside me, within inside everyone, there's a whole bunch of different wants. And each one of those wants are kind of desiring and battling against each other. And what happens is when those wants within inside us bubble over and they come into conflict with the wants inside someone else, they spill out of us and they create this external source of conflict. In fact, the next time you're in an argument with someone, just stop the argument midway through and say, hey, do you know why we're fighting? And before they can even answer, just say, because I'm not getting what I want. Just see what happens. James goes on, he says, you desire, but you do not have, so you kill. Now, James is not saying you literally kill. This is a hyperbole, but surely you know people and I know people who, because they've wanted something so bad, maybe they've wanted that marriage so bad, or they wanted that relationship so bad that they wanted it to the point that they killed it. They wanted that opportunity or that promotion so much that they ended up smothering it and killing it. And James's point isn't that wants or desires are bad. In fact, far from it, but James just wants to highlight and get us to realize that if you don't keep your wants in check, they have the potential to kill the things that you love the most. And then James goes on, he says, you covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. Now, this idea of covet, it's not really a word we use much these days, but it means to hotly pursue. In other words, to chase after, chase after, chase after. And what James is saying here is that you chase after something so quickly, and then you get it, and you discover it's not what you wanted all along. That's why we didn't call this series How to Get What You Want. Instead, we very deliberately chose the title, How to Get What You Really Want. Because there are so many times in life where we go after what we want, only to discover it's not what we really want when we got it. And no one's talking about this. But what lurks in the realm of our peripheral, what sits just below the shadows, is something that Jesus constantly pointed us towards. And James writes towards that in this end. He says, you do not have what you want because you don't ask God. To which you might say, well, James, look, the reason I don't ask God is because if I was to ask God, he wouldn't give it to me anyway. Or maybe you might say like, Chris, I've asked God and he hasn't turned up. And James goes on, he says, well, when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on pleasures. Now, 99% of the time, when we translate the Bible from the original Greek or Aramaic that it was written into English, it comes across really well. But there's that 1% of the time where it's kind of clunky or it doesn't make sense. And wrong motives. When we think of motives, we kind of think of our intentions or the reasons why we did something. But James doesn't mean that here. In fact, I'm going to read to you the literal translation of what James meant. He asks, when you ask, you do not receive because you ask badly, that you may spend what you get on pleasures. James saying, hey, this has nothing to do with the way in which you're asking. James would say that God hasn't given you what you want because you're asking for the wrong things. And believe it or not, God is actually for you. God actually wants the best for you. And so God's not going to give you something that's only going to temporarily satisfy you. And it's why this series is so important. So here's what I want to do for the next 4 episodes of Beyond at Home. I want to help you discover what it is you really want. But in order to do that, first of all, we're going to need to discover what it is you really value. Because the reality is that you'll never discover what you want until you discover what you really value. In fact, at the start of this episode, that's why I asked the question, what do you want? In fact, maybe now might be a good time to even pause the video and just create a list of things that you want. And then once you've created that list, the next question to ask is, why do you want that? And when you begin to actually ask that question, why do you want that? You start to begin a conversation around values. And so for the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about this, and I'm going to help you discover how to get what you really want by discovering what you really value. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be tricky. And I know there are some of you who are like, nah, Chris, I am not coming back for this next episode because this sounds hard. But here's the reality, is if the things you want cause you to want more and more and more, maybe, just maybe, you want the wrong things. And I don't want you to go through life constantly feeling like there's something more to grab a hold of, constantly feeling like there's more that you could be reaching for. I want you to discover what you really want, but it won't happen unless you put in the hard work. So here's what I'm gonna do. I wanna make this as creative as we possibly can. We're gonna give you as many resources as we can to help you do this, but you are gonna have to put in some work. And the first resource that we're gonna give you is a website. In fact, you can head to our website, www.beyondchurch.com.au/really-want-series, and you'll discover 5 questions that you can begin to ask this week to help you figure out what it is you really want.